Today's the 17th of May 2009, and this Teisho today will be part one of a two-part talk on Jukai. 1 month from now, we'll be offering Matariki Jukai. It'll be on the Saturday, the 13th of June. And between then and now, there are only 2 Sundays where we will be having Teisho here in this Sendos, because we'll be having a sesshin starting in 2 weeks, which will use up a couple of weekends. So this is our last chance to talk about precepts before the ceremony. And for this talk, I'll just try and cover the main things we do in the ceremony, and then in next week I'll take up a particular precept and just look at it in detail. And probably I'll do number 6, which is on not gossiping about the faults of others, because it's been quite a theme, quite something that quite a few people have been working on in their term intensive, and it's one that I hear from people again and again is a really difficult one for people, one that hooks them and catches them. So when we take Jukai, one of the first things we do is a kind of a general repentance. There's a gata, a short kind of a prayer that we repeat 9 times in the ceremony. It goes like this: all evil actions committed by me since time immemorial, stemming from greed, anger and delusion, arising from body, speech and mind, I now repent having committed. We start off with this as a way of sort of clearing away our past harmful deeds, starting afresh. Really, the essence of repentance is a sincere desire not to repeat our mistakes. There's a Latin saying, errare humanum est, perseverare autem diabolicum, which translates roughly as, to make mistakes is human, but to persist in our mistakes is devilish. We all make mistakes. This just comes with being ignorant of the true nature of things. But to stubbornly persist in making mistakes is diabolical. And what that just means, when we use this word diabolical or devilish, it just means is that we lose our freedom when we do that. More and more we will be ruled over by our passions. A devil is something that possesses us. We are no longer in the driver's seat. To put it in a more positive way, and this is something that somebody called Hans Reichenbach said, if error is corrected wherever it is recognized as such, the path of error is the path of truth. It's a very, very, very important and fundamental point. We will make mistakes, we will err, but if we can make the effort to correct our mistakes whenever we recognize them as such, then the path of error is transformed into the path of awakening. Sometimes it can be the pain of our mistakes that brings us to practice. Pain has a function, an evolutionary function. it's telling us something. It's saying, don't do that again. It's put your hand on a hot element, you get burnt. And the pain of something like that is so elemental that we remove our hand faster than we can consciously do so. It's just an instinctual thing. So taking this repentance is a way of kind of opening us up to that pain that we experience when we do make mistakes. Then we take the precepts, the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. And these are divided into 3 sections. First off, we take the 3 refuges. These are, I take refuge in Buddha and resolve that with all beings I will understand the great way whereby the Buddha's seed may forever thrive. I take refuge in Dharma and resolve that with all beings I will enter deeply into the sutra treasure so that my wisdom may grow as vast as the ocean. I take refuge in Sangha and in its wisdom, example, and never-failing help, and resolve to live in harmony with all sentient beings. Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are sort of shorthand ways of talking about, first, our enlightened mind. That's Buddha. The word Buddha just means awake. The Dharma is the teachings of the Buddha, but more fundamentally than that, the laws of the universe. And then the Sangha, again, this is something you can have narrower or wider understandings of what Sangha is. Can mean realized ones, enlightened ones. But it can also mean anyone who is sincerely practicing. And that's not just Buddhism. You can extend that to include all people of goodwill, really. And you can extend it further and just say that it's all beings, really. The essence of Sangha is harmony. So right at the start of these precepts, we take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And to take refuge in something is to put your complete trust in it, to enter into it. When I used to give a talk before doing Jukai for children in Rochester, I used to use the analogy of the way that a child will go to his or her mother's arms. That's the kind of sense of refuge we can take in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In taking refuge, we are engaging in an act that is done in all schools of Buddhism, as far as I know, and it's really the traditional initiation as a follower of the way, to take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. One of the points here that's immediately apparent is that although we think of these precepts as being about ethics, they start with the 3 refuges that go way beyond ethics. They're much bigger than that, more fundamental. After the 3 refuges are the 3 general resolutions. These are sometimes also called the 3 pure precepts. And the first one is, I resolve to abstain from evil. Really what this one is summing up is that we resolve to keep the 10 cardinal precepts, which are the next part of the Jukai ceremony. All these 10 precepts, as we'll see shortly, are traditionally formulated in the negative. In other words, not to do such and such. And they're all geared toward not harming. The underlying principle of the precepts is ahimsa. This is a Sanskrit word, and the in Sanskrit is the non or the not particle. So this word ahimsa means not harming. The second of the three general resolutions is to do good, and in some translations it's expanded a little bit. It says to practice all good dharmas. So you could say it's another way of saying it would be to take up whatever is beneficial to myself and others. So this is just the positive formulation of the first of the three general resolutions. It's turning it around, presenting the other side of the coin. Robert Aitken, who I'll be quoting a few times during this talk, puts it, really captures the relationship between these two precepts. Of the first, of the to abstain from evil, he says, "Here I find the hard light of clear definition, the sharp navigational beam of noble speech and conduct." So the first one, you could say, is very clear. Don't cause harm. Avoid harmful actions of body, speech and mind. The second is more sort of open-ended. And he says of this one, "Here my vow is to express my love. Placing these two pure precepts one after the other, I am reminded that the negative and the positive express the same vow. Ahimsa is karuna. Karuna is ahimsa. Non-harming is love. Love is non-harming." This word karuna is actually the word for compassion, but it's very closely related to love in the sense that if you love someone, you will wish to alleviate their suffering. It's an aspect, you could say, of metta or love, loving kindness. Came across this quote by Shakyamuni Buddha. "It is in this way that we must train ourselves, by liberation of the self through love. We will develop love, we will practice it, we will make it both a way and a basis, take our stand upon it, store it up, and thoroughly set it going." Again, in its cool and analytical formulations, sometimes we can lose sight of this as the thread that runs through all of Buddhism, to love. To bring the warmth of human love and compassion into everything we do. The third of the three pure precepts is to resolve to liberate all living beings. And Robert Aitken says of this one that it sets forth the functioning of the first two. He says it gives a specific direction to my way of non-harming and love. In other words, liberation is what it's all about. I can't free myself without bringing along everyone else. It's not possible. In this sense, it takes us back to the three refuges where after we say, I take refuge in Buddha, we say, I resolve that with all beings I will understand the great way, whereby the Buddha's seed may forever thrive. In other words, not I'm going to go off and damn everybody else, I'll figure out what the great way is, and then I'll have it. But I'm going to understand the great way with all beings. How could you possibly understand the great way and ignore all beings? It's a contradiction in terms. And the same with the Dharma. I take refuge in Dharma and resolve that with all beings I will enter deeply into the sutra treasure, so that my wisdom may grow as vast as the ocean. Actually, the sutra treasure, the teachings, are meaningless if we can't apply them to our relationships with all beings. And the third refuge is even more emphatic about this. I take refuge in Sangha and its wisdom, example, and never-failing help, and resolve to live in harmony with all sentient beings. The essence of Sangha is harmony, is learning to live together with others well. So the final 16 are the 10 cardinal precepts, and really these are just one way of elaborating the pure precepts, the 3 pure precepts, and it's done with the number 10. But we could probably do another system which elaborated it in 24 different aspects, or 108 aspects. It's just one way of unpacking this resolution to abstain from harm and to do what is beneficial. Of course, in Christianity, it's boiled down to one precept, which is the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The first precept is, I resolve not to kill, but to cherish all life. And in the formulation we have both the negative and the positive in one sentence usually. Though they came down to us through the in the sutras as 2 separate lists. There would be a list of the things to avoid, and then there would be another list which would formulate those things to avoid positively. And really this precept is first because it is actually the basis of all the precepts. It's also another way of expressing the first of our 4 bodhisattvic vows which we do every day. All beings without number I vow to liberate. To kill something is to rob it of its most basic freedom. All beings want to be alive, and all will avoid suffering if they can. So to live and let live is a very basic thing. But as we'll go into more when we look at an individual precept, we can't apply any of these 10 precepts absolutely. It's important to understand that these precepts are not commandments. They're not set in stone prohibitions, but they're descriptive of how we would behave were we fully enlightened. We can't live in this world and completely avoid killing. To eat is to kill, even if we're vegetarian, even if we're vegan, because the ground has to be tilled. This kills worms. It's selective in what it cultivates. Involves killing weeds, pulling them out. But the essence of all of these precepts is we do our best. We do whatever we can to minimize the killing that takes place. We've talked about this before in relation to possums in New Zealand. It's a very good example, because to let the possums just keep breeding is to see our trees die and our baby birds. But there are ways that can minimize the suffering. For instance, using fences rather than poison. This is something that's really caught on in New Zealand. We now have these various islands of bush with possum-proof fences around them where the native flora and fauna can flourish. And that's an example of skillful means. Baiting is also involved in making those areas possum-free, but once the fence is established and the area has been cleared of possums, then they won't be having to bait so much. Another example would be farmers who farm organically don't need to treat their animals for parasites because they're so much more healthy. So that takes out a whole kind of killing. And if we act skillfully, we can find lots of ways around this. Another example would be pests in the house. Say, things like cockroaches or mice. Obviously, to maintain health in the family, we may have to occasionally get rid of these things. But if we keep things really clean, then they're less likely to come in and need to be removed. So that's a way of taking care of those creatures. And when they do come, we may be able to find a less harmful way of getting rid of them, discouraging them. And there can be also a degree of coexistence. Actually, there will be, because these things find a way of living with us. And there are, of course, very grave issues which this precept addresses. Things like abortion. And here, just read a little piece from The Practice of Perfection. This is Robert Aitken's book on the paramitas. And this is for the chapter on Shila, or morality, talking about this first precept. And he'd just been talking about things like household pests and how to deal with them. And then he says, questions about unwanted pregnancy are not as easy. Again, one would hope that a quiet mind and the Buddha's teaching of non-harming can help the woman work through her crisis. Abortion is killing, but what are the implications of non-harming as an absolute commandment in each specific case? How about the mother who might be so burdened by an extra child that each of her other children is harmed? Indeed, that society generally is harmed, that the very earth is harmed. The woman is feeling her place in the endless stream of procreation, finding her body responding positively to its role, dreaming of her infant at her breast. Men and even other women do not share her particular dilemma. It is our duty to stand by her in her predicament, support her decision, and offer her our help if she should request it. We should also organize for a universal way of compassion and care that will keep such terrible predicaments to the smallest possible number. So it really is a matter of practicing compassion on both sides of these dilemmas that people face. War, of course, is another example where this precept is broken on a massive scale. And being a Buddhist country certainly doesn't exempt one from this. Look at what is happening in Sri Lanka right now. Though it's important to understand that there actually really is no such thing as a Buddhist country. Somebody asked a question about Sri Lanka at the Buddhist conference that was being held last year of Ajahn Brahm, and he said, did the country of Sri Lanka take the 5 precepts, which is what makes somebody a Buddhist? And of course it didn't. And the people who are waging this war may call themselves Buddhists, but if they are flagrantly breaking this precept, then they're not Buddhists. They're not keeping that precept. But it is important that we look at our institutions and at the institutions of Buddhist countries to see how they have been led astray from these precepts, which are so central. And in our own tradition, that means looking squarely and honestly at what happened in Japan during the Second World War, when many Buddhist organizations supported the war, supported the establishment in Japan when it was waging a very unjust war against the Koreans and the Chinese, among others, including the Australians and New Zealanders. And of course, destruction of the biosphere is breaking this precept. And that's where we need to be looking at our own lifestyles and making those as simple as we can, and also being ready to speak up about what is happening and work to raise people's awareness of the way in which our lifestyle impacts on the biosphere. The second precept is, I resolve not to take what is not given, but to respect the things of others. Really, all the precepts are about not killing, and this one is about not killing or undermining the wholeness or integrity of others, but to respect that integrity, and also to respect the workings of karma, that one way or another we have exactly what we need to have according to our karma. Not that we can really know what the causes were that we put in train that have led to where we are now, but we can be sure that we did set in train causes which have led to the present effects. We can relate this to small things like taking a pen that doesn't belong to us. It may seem like a small thing, but remembering that all these precepts are about what we lay down in our minds. And of course, a lot of small actions have a cumulative effect. But you can also apply it to very large-scale things, such as rich countries, first world versus third world. Examples such as the low prices that we often are able to pay for commodities, which are the people who produce those commodities are not even living in survivable conditions because they receive so little money for those commodities. So buying fair trade products would be a way of upholding this precept of not taking what is not given, and being informed about where things we consume come from. Another way that we steal is from future generations who'll have to deal with our nuclear waste and our degraded biosphere. I was reading something the other day which said that up until the 90s, the US was still dumping drums of nuclear waste off the coast of California. And we don't know what the effects of that are. This is a big part of our whole economic system, is the externalizing of costs, not paying, trying to avoid paying for the true cost of something. So going to countries which have poor labour laws, poor health systems, freer environmental laws, so we can have cheap products while other people pay for the consequences of that cheapness. This is taking what is not given. The third precept is I resolve not to engage in harmful sexual relations, but to be loving and responsible. Traditionally, this would be formulated differently for lay people and for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. For lay people, it was mainly avoiding obvious things like adultery and incest, bestiality. And for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, it would be celibacy and chastity. For those of us who have not taken vows of celibacy, really the essential thing in this is understanding sexual expression as being a way of expressing love and affection. So any time it's doing something else, then it would be breaking this precept. So if it's involved in some kind of domination or abuse of power disparity, violence, all of these things would be working at cross purposes to what sexuality is all about. Robert Aitken again. Honest sex, the easy, joyous act and relationship is dana, giving, the gift that brings happiness to the world and to the family. So whenever sex is about taking more than it is about giving, when we use it for personal gratification at someone else's expense, rather than a way of reaching out and relating to somebody. The fourth precept is not to lie but to speak the truth. This precept really is about killing the Dharma. It's hard enough in the best of circumstances to see clearly the truth. We have a lot of trouble with this. We come with a load of unconsciousness, of ignorance. And when we get into consciously lying about the truth, into dissembling, then we just create more confusion for ourselves and for others, and less trust. To lie is to engender mistrust in others and in ourselves too. We will be mistrustful if we lie a lot. We will erode our faith in human beings and ourselves. But on the other hand, brutal honesty can be killing too. So we need to look at motives. We need to see what is really we're trying to do. What is the underlying motivation? And then it'll be clearer about whether we're breaking this precept or not. What serves Dharma? Number 5 is I resolve not to cause others to take intoxicants, nor to do so myself, but to keep the mind clear. And this brings us to the end of the first 5, which are shared by all the different schools of Buddhism too. These are common. The last 5 vary from version to version, different schools and and branches of Buddhism. This one about not causing others to take intoxicants, originally it was not to sell intoxicants, so that giving them to other people came ahead of taking them oneself as being more of a transgression. But what this precept is really about is the mind and keeping the mind clear. Again, how difficult that is, even if we don't take any intoxicants. We have enough trouble with that without muddying the water further by using substances which either overstimulate the mind or agitate it or dull it. It can include things that aren't drugs, such as certain kinds of reading, certain kinds of films, television, internet, if it's misused. We've really just got to be sensitive to what it is that is helpful to our minds and what isn't. And again, it's not an absolute. Half a glass of wine or a beer may be okay, eaten with a meal. We've got to navigate a bunch of things with this one. And in company, it may be better to take a small bit of alcohol rather than making everybody uncomfortable. But we've got to just decide what's best for us and for others in the moment, in the situation. Number 6 is I resolve not to gossip about the faults of others, but to speak with kindness and respect. Robert Aitken, commenting on this one, says, more people get hurt by gossip than by guns. What is it about gossip that is so harmful? Well, what we do when we gossip about somebody is we put them in a box and we say, this person is such and such. And it is a kind of killing, because we're sort of condemning that person as being whatever it is, bad-tempered or inefficient or thick. When actually we have, all of us, we have infinite depth and infinite potential. We have many sides. We have subjectivity. We make somebody into an object when we gossip about them and say they're a certain way. We overlook their possibility that they can change and evolve. It's a kind of arrogance to think that we really know people. We can't really know somebody completely. So here we can bring in the advice or the way of being that we receive from our founder Bodhidharma, the wisdom of not knowing. Another aspect to this one is just that really our weaknesses are our strength and vice versa. Take, for instance, somebody who's rude. This can also be a positive thing in that you're likely to know their minds. They'll tell you what they think. So these traits that we have always have two sides. And we can always, whenever we're having an opinion about someone, we can always bring in the other side. See it from a more positive angle and appreciate that. Seventh precept is I resolve not to praise myself and disparage others, but to speak with honesty and humility. This one's very similar to the last one, and as I sometimes say to people, it's probably two that are so similar because it's something we have a lot of trouble with. But this one's looking at it more from the side of how we speak about ourselves, how we we puff ourselves up through our talking, and this really is addressing our self-partiality. And this is the source of our suffering, this way in which we separate from others. So we can really relieve our own suffering in a large way by not doing this, not raising ourselves up. Because we do it out of a sense of lack. Why would we have to do it if we really felt that we were okay? We do it because we have this dread that actually we're terrible, we're hopeless, we're no good. Also, humility is vital if we're to learn anything. Comes back to not knowing again. To learn how to really listen to people and to the world around us is an essential ingredient of awakening. Number 8. I resolve not to withhold spiritual or material aid, but to give them freely where needed. This precept is about our holding back, about our fears of loss, that somehow we live in a world of scarcity and that we have to protect and defend what we have. If you look at the natural world, it's a world that is extraordinarily abundant. There's a tree that's in flower outside our house at the moment, which for the next couple of months will just continue to produce these beautiful white blossoms. There are some of them on the altar right now. It's called a gordonia, and it just keeps on producing these flowers, and they drop all over the pavement. It goes on and on. This is what nature is like. The sun is the prime example of this. It burns itself up to give us light and heat. So it's finding a resource of generosity. This course is referring to our money, our possessions, but also to our talents. To use what we were given, what we were born with, well. Also our voice. We human beings have the power of speech. Then we need to use it in order to give voice to what needs to be said. And also our efforts, our energy, where we put our energy. Martin Luther King said there comes a time in all our lives when silence is betrayal. Good example of that is the environmental crisis we're in right now. Our job is to speak up about this, to speak to each other, to speak to those in power. Well, we're running out of time, so we'll just save the last two, not to indulge in anger and not to revile the three treasures, to next week, and stop here and recite the 4 vows.